My name is Danielle Cooper. I'm 30 years old, and I run a tech company called NovaLink. We build user behavior analytics platforms for businesses, systems that watch patterns people don't even realize they're leaving behind. It's not glamorous. No fancy product launch stage, no viral speeches, no shiny interviews. And that's exactly how I like it. I've always been more comfortable behind what I create. Quiet hands, quiet wins, quiet life. People think that's just my personality. But the truth is, I was trained for silence long before I ever learned to code. Growing up, my house had two daughters. There was Lucia, my older sister, 2 years older, confident, bright, the kind of person who could walk into a room and make everyone feel like the room was built for her. Then there was me, the one who stayed close to the walls, the one who learned to laugh softly so nobody accused me of being dramatic, the one who listened more than she spoke because speaking always seemed to cost me something. At family gatherings, Lucia was the story. Lucia's grades, Lucia's friends, Lucia's plans, Lucia's future. And me? I existed like background music, only noticed when the sound stopped. For most of my life, I believed that in some families you survive by shrinking. You become small so everyone else can stay comfortable. You swallow reactions. You fold your needs into your pocket. You keep the peace, because peace, even if it's fake, still feels safer than war. That belief followed me into adulthood like a shadow. It's why, even now, running a company with dozens of employees, earning more money than anyone in my family ever imagined, I never told them. Not because I'm hiding, not because I'm ashamed, but because deep down I knew exactly what would happen if they found out. They wouldn't see me. They would see what they could take from me. To my parents, I'm still just Danielle, the daughter who works from home, stares at screens all day, never wears a suit, never brings a +1 to Thanksgiving, never gives them anything shiny enough to brag about. And I never corrected them, because when you grow up being overlooked, you eventually stop trying to prove you exist. That's why the phone call from my father, a little over a year ago, made my stomach tighten before he even finished the first sentence. "Danielle," he said, voice flat, like he was reading a schedule. "Come home for dinner this weekend. There's something important I need to announce." He didn't ask if I was free. He didn't ask if I wanted to come. He said it the way he used to say, "Take out the trash," or "Stop slouching." An order wrapped in the thin disguise of family. I stared out my apartment window at the city lights, already feeling tired. "Dad, I can't," I said. "I'm busy." My calendar was packed. Meetings, product review, a client call that could change the quarter. But even if it wasn't, I still wouldn't want to go, because I knew what those dinners felt like. Lucia sitting upright like royalty, my mother smiling too brightly, my father's jokes that weren't jokes, and me choosing the smallest bites, the quietest words, the safest facial expression. A table where Lucia was the sun and I was furniture. Dad's tone sharpened instantly. "This is not optional," he snapped. "Be here at 6. Don't start with your attitude." My fingers tightened around my phone. I almost said something then. Something real. Something like, "You don't get to talk to me like I'm 12 anymore." But the old reflex kicked in before courage could. Silence. Peace. Compliance. "I'll be there," I said. When I hung up, I sat very still. Not angry, just aware. Aware of how quickly my adult life could be pulled backward by one familiar voice. At exactly 6 the next evening, I pulled into my parents' driveway. The house looked the same. Trim lawn, warm lights behind the curtains, a place that from the outside always looked like stability. Inside, it smelled like roast chicken and old expectations. Lucia's car was already parked out front. Of course it was. Lucia was always first. Always prepared. Always performing. When I walked into the dining room, my father looked up, scanned me like I was a late delivery, and said the line I'd heard in 100 forms my whole life. "Lucia's here on time," he said, irritation barely hidden. "You still can't manage that." I arrived at 6 on the dot. But in his world, Lucia existed in gold time. I existed in wrong time. I swallowed the tightness in my throat and slid into my chair. My mother tried to soften things with a smile. The kind of smile that said, "Let it go, Danielle. Don't make it weird." So I did what I always did. I let it go. For a while, conversations circled Lucia, her work, her social life, the new apartment she'd been touring. My father asked questions like he was interviewing someone he admired. I barely spoke. Then Lucia set down her glass carefully, like she wanted the sound to land. "I have an announcement," she said. My father's face changed, brightening, proud, expectant. My mother's hands clasped together like she was about to receive a gift. Lucia glanced at me, just long enough for her eyes to say, "Watch this." In 2 weeks, she said, I'm getting married. My mother gasped. My father leaned forward like a man receiving the news of a promotion. That's my girl, he said immediately. I knew you wouldn't waste time. Lucia smiled. Then she added, smooth as a knife sliding in, and I hope, Danielle, that you'll put the past behind you and come. Something in my chest went cold, because that sentence wasn't about invitations. It was about warning. I looked up slowly. Have you thought this through? I asked. Lucia's smile twitched, just for a second. My father frowned. My mother stiffened, like she could already sense the storm. Lucia's eyes stayed on mine. I have, she said. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to be the person who ruined a moment. But I was tired of swallowing poison and calling it peace. So I said it anyway. Who is he? I asked, though I already knew. My voice stayed even, but my hands were ice cold under the table. Tell me his name. Lucia leaned back like she was enjoying this. Then she said it. Harper. The name hit my body first, before my mind could catch up. Harper. My ex-boyfriend. The one who once held my face in his hands and promised me forever, until forever started looking expensive. Lucia watched my reaction closely, like she wanted to measure how deep the damage still ran. And before I could stop myself, I spoke. Lucia, I said, loud enough that even my father stopped chewing. Harper left me because I didn't have a solid career back then, because I didn't look like a sure thing. And after that, he didn't exactly become a man known for loyalty. Lucia's chair scraped back hard. Her eyes flared. You don't get to talk about him like that, she snapped. I held her gaze. I'm not insulting him, I said. I'm warning you. My father slammed his hand on the table. What would you know? He barked. You sit glued to a computer all day. You don't even live in the real world. My mother's voice came next, quieter but heavier. Or maybe, she said slowly, eyes narrowing, you still have feelings for him. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Not because it was true, but because she would rather believe I was pathetic than believe I might be right. That was the old pattern. If Lucia wanted something, I was supposed to step aside. If Lucia chose my leftovers, I was supposed to smile and pretend it was fate. And right then, I realized something sharp and ugly. They weren't just inviting me to a wedding. They were inviting me to be a prop, a cautionary tale, a punchline dressed in family colors. I stood up. My chair legs dragged against the floor, loud in the sudden silence. I think I'll head out, I said. Lucia's mouth curved slightly, like she'd won. My father looked satisfied, like order had been restored. My mother sighed, as if I'd disappointed her by existing too loudly. I grabbed my coat and left. Not in anger, not in tears, just with a quiet certainty that if I stayed, I would lose another piece of myself. I drove downtown with no destination, the city lights blurring like my thoughts. Eventually, I ended up at an old coffee shop, one of the few places that had never asked me to be smaller. I sat by the window, ordered a plain Americano, and tried to breathe through the tightness in my chest. The quiet should have helped. But quiet has a way of calling up memories you've buried. And Harper was a memory I'd spent years trying not to touch. 8 years ago, right after graduation, I was nothing but a fresh grad with a thin resume and a head full of unfinished dreams. That's when I met him. He was charming, warm, certain, the kind of man who could make you believe the future was already ours, as long as I kept walking beside him. Back then we were broke, but it didn't matter. Or at least, I thought it didn't. I remembered him saying, I don't need you to be rich, Danielle. I need you not to give up. I remembered believing him. And then I remembered the night everything cracked. The night I drove to his apartment with a box of his favorite food, hoping to surprise him, and saw him outside, arms around someone else, kissing like it was practiced. A kiss that didn't look like a mistake. A kiss that looked like a decision. I stared at my coffee cup until the surface went still. And in the reflection, I saw my own face. Older now, steadier, but still carrying that moment like a scar under the skin. 2 weeks. Lucia's wedding. My ex. My family's favorite daughter. And me, invited not as a sister, not as family, but as proof that I was the one who lost. I leaned back in my chair, heart thudding slow. And the question circled my mind like a vulture. Should I even go? Because something told me, if I showed up, they wouldn't just hurt me privately this time. They'd do it in front of everyone, and they'd smile while they did it. The coffee shop's lights were warm, almost gentle, like they were trying to soften the sharp edges of my thoughts. It didn't work. Outside the window, the city moved on like nothing had changed. Cars passed. People laughed as they walked by. A couple hurried under the street lamp glow, shoulders pressed close, their world small and safe. I watched them and wondered when love had stopped feeling safe for me. Because once it was. Once Harper's voice had been the place I wanted to rest. I met him a year before graduation through a mutual friend. One of those casual weekend hangouts where everyone pretends they're not looking for anything, until someone walks in and your brain goes quiet. Harper had that effect. He stood out without trying. Sharp smile, confident posture, the kind of man who looked like he had plans even when he was just ordering a cheap drink. I was quieter back then, still trying to earn my space in the world, still trained to take up as little room as possible. And for reasons I didn't understand at the time, he looked at me like I mattered. We started talking. Small things at first. Classes, music, the stress of post-grad life looming like a shadow behind every conversation. Then the talking turned into late-night walks. Late-night walks turned into routine. And routine turned into a relationship so natural it scared me. College wasn't easy for me. I worked almost every evening to pay rent and keep my textbooks from turning into debt. Harper wasn't exactly floating in money either, but he carried himself like he would be someday. And I think that confidence made me feel like I could borrow some of it. We ate cheap dinners at the same sandwich shop until the employees started greeting us like we were regular fixtures. We studied together at the library until closing, exhausted and half laughing at how bleak the future felt. And somehow, in all that struggle, I believed we were building something real. I remember one night in a nearly empty diner, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the kind of place where the coffee tasted like metal and nobody cared how long you stayed. We were both drained from exams and work. We were counting dollars to figure out if we could afford dessert. Harper reached across the table, held my hand, and whispered like he was afraid the world would steal his words if he spoke too loud. "I don't need you to be rich," he said. "I need you not to give up. We'll build something together." Another time, I told him I felt lost, like everyone else had their future mapped out, and I was just wandering. He tilted his head, smiled softly, and said, "Who needs a clear direction when I know who I want to walk with?" And the night before graduation, when my anxiety was so tight it felt like a wire around my ribs, Harper pressed his forehead to mine and murmured, "I don't care how much you make, as long as the person who comes home at the end of the day is you." I believed him. I believed every word. Maybe that was my real failure, not being broke, not being quiet, just being the kind of person who takes love at face value. Because everything changed the night I saw him kiss another woman. I hadn't planned to go to his apartment that night. I'd been working late, sweaty and exhausted, the kind of tired that makes you feel hollow. But I thought about him, about the way he'd been stressed lately, about how he always ate when he was anxious, about how he loved that ridiculous lasagna from the little place near his building. So I stopped and bought it. I pictured him opening the door, surprised, smiling that boyish smile that made his eyes soften. We'd eat late, talk about nothing, pretend adulthood wasn't about to swallow us whole. That was the plan. But when I turned onto his street, the plan died before I even parked. Harper was outside near the gate of his building. He wasn't alone. He was talking to a woman older than me, polished, composed, dressed like she belonged in a different world. A sleek black sedan sat near the curb, the kind of car that screamed money so loudly it didn't need a logo. I slowed my car, confusion tightening in my throat. Then I saw Harper step closer to her. I saw her hand touch his shoulder, and I saw them kiss. Not a quick, guilty peck, a familiar kiss. The kind you don't do unless you've done it before. My hands went numb on the steering wheel. The lasagna box, still warm, sat on my passenger seat like a joke. I didn't honk. I didn't call his name. I just sat there, staring, as if my eyes could force the scene to change. It didn't. When the woman finally got into the car and drove off, I watched the taillights disappear like they were taking something from me. Then I got out of my car. My legs felt heavy, like my body was trying to protect me by refusing to move. But I walked anyway, straight toward him, the warm food still in my hand. Harper turned when he heard my steps. His face drained of color. "Danielle?" I held up the box like it was evidence in a courtroom. My voice came out too calm, which scared me more than if I'd been screaming. I saw everything. For a second, I waited for the denial, the excuses, the lies people tell when they're cornered. But Harper didn't deny it. He didn't even look ashamed. He looked resigned, like this was inevitable and I was simply the last to know. He exhaled, rubbing his forehead. "I didn't want you to find out like that," he said. I blinked, almost stunned by the audacity. "Find out like that?" His jaw tightened. "Yes," he said. "I've been seeing someone else." My chest ached, but it was a quiet ache, distant, like my body was trying to numb the blow before my mind fully felt it. "Why?" I asked. Harper's eyes flickered toward the street, toward where the sedan had been. Then he looked back at me, voice low, firm, almost cold. "We should stop," he said. "I don't hate you, but I can't sacrifice my future to be with someone who still has to skip meals to pay rent." I went very still. because part of me understood the math. Back then, I'd been working my first job barely 3 months. I was making around $3,000 a month, just enough to rent a rundown apartment on the outskirts and survive. I knew I didn't look like security. But love wasn't supposed to be a business plan. Love was supposed to be human. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just nodded slowly, like my body was taking instructions my heart hadn't agreed to yet. Then I turned and walked away. I don't remember driving home. I don't remember eating. I just remember the quiet afterward, thick and endless, like the world had been stuffed with cotton. For 3 weeks, I tried to pretend I was fine. I showed up to work on time, smiled in meetings, made small talk like I hadn't been hollowed out. Then week 4 hit, not with a dramatic breakdown, with a quiet collapse. One night, I found myself on my balcony, curled into a chair, staring at the dark sky with a half-finished beer in my hand, as if bitterness could drown betrayal if I drank enough of it. That's when Michael showed up, my best friend since college. The only person who had ever looked at me and seen the real me, not the quiet daughter, not the shadow sister. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't give me sympathy. He just leaned against the railing beside me, looked at the beer, looked at my blank expression, and dropped a sentence like a slap. "You want him back?" he asked. "You want to be remembered forever as the woman who got dumped because she had nothing?" I turned toward him, shocked, angry for half a second. But the anger didn't stick. Because deep down, I knew he wasn't trying to hurt me. He was trying to wake me up. Michael's voice stayed calm, but his eyes were sharp. "Danielle," he said, "you've spent your whole life being quiet so nobody gets uncomfortable. And what has it gotten you? You think love is supposed to be something you beg to keep?" I stared at him. He continued, lower now, like he was talking directly to the part of me that still believed in shrinking. "Make them regret underestimating you," he said. "Not for revenge, for yourself." That night was the first time I didn't just swallow pain. I let it fuel me. The days after that became a grind. By day, I worked tech support at a mid-level software firm, answering calls, solving problems, pretending I wasn't rebuilding my entire identity in the spaces between tasks. By night, I freelanced, writing code, building databases, taking any legal job that paid on time. My life became a loop of exhaustion and determination. Eat fast, sleep little, work more. And slowly, something changed. 3 years later, I remember staring at my bank account one evening and seeing a number I never thought I'd reach. Just under 200,000. I sat there in silence, blinking at the screen like I was reading someone else's story. Then Michael, again, showed up at the right moment. Same coffee shop, same smell of espresso, same background music trying to be soothing. He set his cup down, leaned in, and looked me straight in the eyes. "What you're building for other people can make them millions," he said. "So why can't you be the one making it?" That question burrowed into my brain and refused to leave. I didn't sleep before 2 a.m. for days. My mind kept replaying the same thought. Why am I always helping someone else's dream grow when mine keeps starving? 2 weeks later, I quit my job. I poured everything I had into a company I named NovaLink. My company, my risk, my leap. I took a small bank loan, low interest, still terrifying, and started building. The first year nearly broke me. Clients were scarce. Cash flow was always flashing red like a warning light. There were nights I sat in the office alone after everyone left, staring at the code and wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. But I kept going, because something in me had snapped into place. I wasn't building a company just to be successful. I was building proof. Proof that I wasn't the woman Harper had walked away from. Year 2, we stabilized, steady clients, just enough to keep the team afloat. We weren't thriving, but we were no longer drowning. Then the world shifted. The AI boom hit like a tidal wave, and NovaLink was already positioned to ride it. We landed our biggest contract yet. Tech blogs started writing about us. Forums started dissecting our business model. Investors started knocking. There was one detail they couldn't figure out, though. Across every profile, every article, every data sheet, the name of NovaLink's founder was always missing. Who is the person behind NovaLink? That question showed up everywhere, and I let it. I stayed invisible, not because I wanted to be mysterious, but because I understood what attention can do to a quiet life. And I understood what success would do to my family if they found out. Michael once told me, half joking but dead serious, "Don't ever let people know you're loaded, especially the ones who never believed in you. Trouble finds you faster than you think." So I kept playing the part. The quiet daughter with the laptop. The one nobody bragged about. The one Lucia could still look down on without fear. Until 2 years ago, at my mother's birthday party, when Harper walked in on Lucia's arm. Tight outfit, perfect hair, polished smile. He didn't even look like the man who once told me I wasn't worth the sacrifice. Lucia introduced him like a trophy. Then she turned to me and said loud enough for people to hear, "This is my younger sister Danielle, always glued to a computer, still figuring life out." Harper's lips curved in a small, condescending smile. He leaned in and said lightly, like he was sharing a harmless joke, "I know, I once considered getting to know her, but that was all." Lucia laughed. Everyone else laughed. And Harper looked at me like I was still that helpless girl holding warm lasagna in a cold street. Later that night, he found me near the kitchen, cornered me with a glass of wine in his hand, and said quietly, "All these years, and you're still the same, huh? Still forgettable, nothing special, no future. Guess I made the right choice." He said it softly, but it cut loudly. And I didn't respond, because silence was my survival language. But sitting in that coffee shop now with Lucia's wedding 2 weeks away, I realized something. If I went, they weren't going to let me be silent. They were going to drag me into the spotlight, just to laugh at me there. I stared at the city lights, my coffee long cold, and finally, I whispered the question out loud, even though no one could hear it. Am I walking into a trap? My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from my mother. Venue details, dress code, and one final line. "Please don't cause any trouble, Danielle. This day is important for your sister." I read it twice, then I let out a slow breath. Because in that one sentence, I heard the truth they would never admit. To them, I wasn't family. I was a risk, a loose thread they wanted to keep tucked away. I set my phone down and stared out the window, my reflection staring back at me. Older, steadier, but still carrying that quiet ache. And I made my decision. I would go. Not because they deserve my presence, but because I deserved to stop running from them. Because if Lucia and Harper wanted to make me the punchline, then I would show up and refuse to laugh. The venue sat in the heart of the city, all glass and polished stone, expensive in the way that wanted you to notice. Even the air inside felt curated. Soft lighting, champagne flutes catching gold, laughter that sounded practiced. I arrived 30 minutes early, not because I was eager, but because showing up late had always been framed as another flaw I needed to apologize for. As soon as I stepped through the doors, my father spotted me. His eyes moved over me slowly, measured, critical, before his mouth tightened. "I honestly didn't think you'd show," he said. "This place is for people who know how to dress and behave appropriately." Then he leaned closer, lowering his voice like he was doing me a favor. "Lucia's bosses and business partners are here. Try not to embarrass her." I nodded, said nothing, because if I'd learned anything in the last few years, it was this. The calmest response is often the one that leaves people the most unsettled. I walked deeper into the venue. Lucia and Harper stood near the reception area, framed by white flowers and soft music, smiling like the cover of a bridal magazine. They looked perfect. When they saw me, both smiles widened. Lucia hugged me lightly, barely a touch. Harper's greeting was polite, distant, like we were acquaintances who'd met at a conference once. "Glad you could make it," Lucia said sweetly. "Hope you enjoy the night." As they turned to walk away, Lucia leaned in just enough for only me to hear. "There's a little surprise coming your way later." Her tone was playful. Her eyes were not. I didn't ask what she meant. I already knew. I poured myself a drink at the bar and waited. The ceremony began about 30 minutes later. Guests took their seats. Music swelled. Lucia and Harper walked onto the stage together, glowing, confident, entirely convinced the world was applauding them, and only them. Applause filled the room. Lucia took the microphone first, thanking everyone for coming, her voice warm and practiced. Harper followed, charming as ever. Then Lucia shifted her stance. Her eyes locked onto me. "And now," she said brightly, "I'd like to invite my younger sister, Danielle, to join us on stage." Polite applause followed, curious, restrained. I felt every eye turn toward me. For a brief moment, I considered staying seated. But something in me, something old and tired, stood up before fear could argue. I walked to the stage. Lucia placed a hand on my shoulder like we were close, like she hadn't spent years reminding me I was less. She leaned toward the mic, smiling wide. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "the person I owe the biggest thank you to tonight." A pause. "My sister Danielle." Light laughter rippled through the crowd. She continued, voice honeyed, "Because if it weren't for her, I wouldn't have Harper." More laughter. Some claps. To them, it probably sounded like fate, like a harmless anecdote, like I had gracefully stepped aside. Lucia wasn't done. She squeezed my shoulder, just a little tighter. "Danielle," she said, louder now, deliberate, "it's because of your failure that I got to marry Harper." The room responded. Applause, nods, smiles. Harper stood beside her, relaxed, enjoying it. I felt the old reflex kick in, the urge to disappear. But I didn't. Lucia turned back to the crowd, warming to her role. They dated years ago, she continued. But Danielle lacked ambition. She didn't know what she wanted in life. That gave me the chance to step into Harper's heart. This time the applause was louder, warmer. To everyone watching, I was nothing more than a stepping stone in a beautiful love story. A woman who failed and made room for something better. Lucia smiled at me, triumphant. And then a voice cut through the room. "Lucia," a man said calmly. That was out of line. The applause stopped. Silence fell so fast it felt physical. A man stood from one of the front tables wearing a tailored gray suit, his presence quiet but commanding. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Lucia froze. Harper's smile faltered. The man walked toward the stage, eyes steady, expression unreadable. When his gaze met mine, recognition flashed. He reached the steps and extended his hand. "Danielle Cooper," he said, "founder of NovaLink." The world seemed to tilt. I shook his hand, my heart pounding, not from fear, but from the sudden shift in gravity. He took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice even, "the woman standing here is the founder of NovaLink, one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the past 2 years, twice named among the top 10 most promising startups in the industry." Murmurs spread like a wave. Heads turned. Eyes sharpened. Lucia's face drained of color. Harper looked like he'd been punched. The man turned to me gently. "Would you like to say something?" I took the microphone. For most of my life, I'd been quiet because I thought silence kept people comfortable. But standing there, I realized something else. Silence had never protected me. It had only protected them. I took a slow breath. "I've never been great at public speaking," I said. "But if there was ever a time to speak, it's now." The room stilled. "Everything my sister said about me is true," I continued calmly. "But it's not the whole truth." I turned slightly, eyes sweeping the room. 7 years ago, Harper didn't leave me because I lacked ambition. He cheated on me while we were still together. I saw it with my own eyes, outside his apartment, the night I went to surprise him. A collective inhale. Harper froze. Lucia's hand dropped from my shoulder like it burned. "I'm not angry today," I went on. "I'm not here for revenge." I looked at Harper, my voice steady. "I want to say thank you." Confusion rippled. "If it weren't for your betrayal," I said, "I might still be clinging to a love that took more than it gave. I wouldn't have built the life I have now. Your rejection was the push I didn't know I needed." I handed the microphone back, nodded once, and walked off the stage. I didn't look back, because everything that needed to be said had already been said. I walked straight out of the venue, the cool night air hitting my face like freedom. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel angry. I felt done. My phone rang as I reached my car. A familiar name lit up the screen. I answered. "Danielle," the voice said carefully, "it's Mr. Blake." I leaned against the car, listening. "There's something you should know," he continued. "Right after you left, the wedding was called off." I closed my eyes. "Harper walked out," he said. "Lucia was left standing there alone." I didn't feel satisfaction, just a long, quiet stillness. The kind that settles when something finally ends. I didn't go home right away after the call. I sat in my car for the long time, hands resting on the steering wheel, staring at the dark outline of the building where a wedding had just imploded. I felt nothing. No triumph, no guilt, no rush of justice. Just a strange, weightless quiet, like something I'd been carrying for years, had finally slipped off my shoulders without asking permission. When I eventually drove back to my apartment, the city felt distant. I kicked off my heels, left my coat on the chair, and stood in the middle of the living room like I didn't quite belong there yet. My phone rang again. "Mr. Blake," I answered. "I wanted to be clear," he said, voice steady but careful. "Lucia is one of my direct reports. I don't want personal matters interfering with business, especially when NovaLink is one of our strategic partners." I leaned against the kitchen counter. "This is a family matter," I replied after a beat. "I don't want it handled through work. Please, do whatever you think is appropriate." There was a pause on the line. Then he exhaled. "I appreciate your professionalism," he said. "I'll handle it." We hung up. I went to bed that night, expecting sleep to avoid me. It didn't. For the first time in a long while, I slept straight through until morning. At 10 a.m., just as I was wrapping up a product meeting, my assistant knocked lightly on my office door. "There are 2 people in the lobby asking for you," she said. "They say they're your parents." I stared at her, not shocked, just unsurprised. "Send them in," I said. My parents sat stiffly on the long couch near reception when I walked downstairs. They looked smaller there, out of place among glass walls, digital screens, and people moving with purpose. I led them into a small meeting room and closed the door. My father didn't waste time. "I was wrong," he said bluntly. "I always favored Lucia. I thought she was the capable one, the one worth investing in." My mother sat quietly beside him, hands folded tight. I regret not standing up for you, she added, voice unsteady. I stayed silent when I shouldn't have. I listened. Then I asked the question that had been sitting in my chest since the night before. If I weren't the founder of NovaLink, I said evenly, would you still be here? Silence, the kind that doesn't rush to fill itself. Finally, my father spoke. We didn't come to ask for money, he said. We don't want anything. I just finally see how capable you are. He hesitated, then added, come home for dinner this weekend, that's all. They left shortly after. I stayed seated, coffee cooling untouched in my hands. I wasn't angry, but I wasn't relieved either, because apologies that arrive after success always carry a question mark. Later that afternoon, my assistant returned with an iPad. There's a video going viral, she said gently, from the wedding. I watched it once. Lucia's speech, my name, the laughter. Then Mr. Blake standing, the reveal, my words. The comments were brutal. Humiliating your sister at her own wedding? Unreal. Harper really bet on the wrong future. This feels like a Netflix drama. By evening, tech blogs had picked it up. Lifestyle outlets followed. No one defended Lucia. No one excused Harper. The internet had decided, and it was unforgiving. An email arrived from Mr. Blake before I left for the day. Short, direct. Danielle, I've terminated Lucia's employment effective immediately. Her actions reflect a lack of personal control that impacts the company's reputation. This decision does not affect our partnership with NovaLink. I read it twice, not for disbelief, just to let it settle. Lucia had spent her life being protected by our parents, by image, by opportunity. For the first time, there was no one left to soften the fall. That night, I went home and turned off my phone. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel like isolation. It felt like space. I thought that night at the wedding was the last time Harper would ever appear in my life. I was wrong. 3 months passed. Work filled my days. Product launches, late meetings, strategy calls that reminded me why I'd built NovaLink in the first place. Life felt steady again, not euphoric, just grounded. Then, one late afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message I hadn't seen in years. Harper, can I see you? No apology, no explanation, just a request, as if time hadn't done its damage. I didn't respond right away. But a week later, curiosity, or maybe closure, won. We met at a coffee shop we used to go to when we were both broke and hopeful, when dreams felt lighter because they hadn't failed us yet. Harper was already there when I arrived. He looked different, not older, just smaller, like the certainty he used to wear had finally slipped off. We sat across from each other in silence, steam rising from 2 untouched cups of coffee. Finally, he spoke. I still love you. The words hung there, fragile and late. I studied his face, searching for something familiar, for regret, for truth. What I saw instead was loss and fear. I smiled, not unkindly, but clearly. I think you're mistaken, I said gently. The person you loved was the version of me who needed you, the one who thought love meant survival. Harper's shoulders sagged. His hands trembled slightly around the cup. I made a mistake, he whispered. Yes, I agreed. You did. I stood, placed cash on the table for both coffees, and walked out without another word. Some chapters don't need dramatic endings. They just need to close. Lucia's story didn't resolve as quietly. After the firing, her name followed her everywhere. Applications rejected, interviews canceled, whispers that never quite stopped. The golden daughter had fallen. A year passed before my phone rang again with her name. I almost didn't answer, but I did. I want to see you, Lucia said. Her voice was rough, nothing like the polished tone she once wielded so easily. If you're okay with that. We met at a small cafe near our old college apartment complex, the kind of place where we'd once shared cheap meals and borrowed hope. Lucia was already seated, hunched slightly, hands clasped tight. When I walked in, she didn't smile. She didn't perform. That alone told me everything. I was wrong, she said after a long pause. I've lost almost everything. My job, my name, Harper. She swallowed. I'm not asking for forgiveness, she added. I'm asking for a chance, a job, any position you think I'm fit for. I watched her carefully. This was the woman who had once stood on a stage and called my pain her victory. And yet, what sat across from me now wasn't arrogance. It was reckoning. You'll start at the bottom, I said finally. No title, no special treatment. Lucia nodded immediately. And for the first time in my life, there was no entitlement in her eyes, only humility. It's been a year since everything shattered. I still visit my parents occasionally, not often, just enough. They no longer compare me to Lucia. They don't ask when I'll catch up. They tell neighbors their youngest daughter founded a tech company. I ask them gently to stop. Not because I don't appreciate it, but because pride built on guilt is fragile. Lucia works at NovaLink now. Customer service. $45,000 a year. No office, no spotlight. She shows up on time, does her work, says thank you. Sometimes I pass her in the hallway, coffee in hand, eyes on her phone like everyone else. And that's when it hits me. Forgiveness isn't about erasing the past. It's about being able to look back without your chest tightening, standing steady enough that you no longer need to rise above anyone. Before I end this story, I want to ask you something. Was I wrong for speaking the truth at a wedding meant for celebration? Was I wrong for giving my sister a second chance after she used the most important day of her life to humiliate me? Tell me what you think. And if this story stayed with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear it today.